What do we got here? What is this called? A viaduct, an aqueduct?
Well, it's actually a culvert.
It's a culvert.
Okay, the railroad right-of-way runs through here. And every time there was a bay or a creek or something, they built a little bridge over it. And on an outgoing tide, it flushes out that back bay, and the bass sit and wait for the bait to be flushed out, conveniently.
All right, well, let's go flush our own bait.
Okay, well, why don't you move the boat in there a little bit closer, and we'll first work the outside of it with buzz baits.
When a drain crosses under a railroad bridge, we call it a culvert. And it creates the equation of drainage equals current equals bait fish equals bass as we cash in on the culverts. The best time?
The last couple of hours of the outgoing tide. Now, we're here actually a little bit late, and the water's just about completely fallen.
The secret is current and water level. Bait fish are drawn out of their cover in the back bay behind the culvert by the falling water level and subsequent current. The bass?
You've got to remember that these fish will be facing into the current. So they'll be facing into the culvert, and you want to throw over them and bring it back over their head so they'll come up and get it.
Like this one.
Like that one.
Well, it ain't a big one, but it's a bass. It's probably not even legal.
That might go 12 inches.
Well, I'll tell you, if I were tournament fishing, I'd measure them, but
Right
for now,
put them back.
we'll let them go.
What the camera is showing us here is the area you can fish on most culverts. There's the concrete abutments and wood pilings of the culvert itself, the riprap at the base, and the weeds off to the side of the channel where the boat's sitting. This channel, about 3 feet deeper than the surrounding bottom, connects the back bay to the main river. Oh, and you don't need a train ticket to fish culverts.
Well, what do we got here?
What we've got here from above is the total culvert pattern. When the railroad first came to the Hudson Valley, it brought with it railroad tracks. Now, every time these tracks crossed over an inlet or bay or creek, they built a bridge. I figure these old-time engineers must have been fishermen because in the process, they created some of the best bass fishing habitat. Pick out a back bay, that is a bay behind a culvert. Oh, incidentally, a few of these bays are accessible by boat, and they can provide some good fishing, but in most cases, you fish the outside. Let's remove the bridge for a moment and check the fish positioning. As the tide begins to fall, you get current through the culvert, and bass will begin to move up on station. Here, on the abutments, the riprap, any weed edges, and in the channel behind any submerged obstruction. So what's the big deal? On any river, there's current, right? But on a tidal river, the water level drops. It forces the bait fish to move. Bait are literally flushed out of hiding. And we've moved up almost flush with the culvert. Mike and I are both at the bow, pitching worms and slowly working them past the cover and the structure underneath. Could this be a train pattern?
You've been fishing this river how many years now?
Oh, close to 10 now.
Have you ever caught a fish right when that train's coming by?
Yep.
Is there such thing as a train pattern?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
How many times are you on the water over a course of a year on the Hudson?
Oh, on the Hudson?
Yeah.
Oh, probably 60, 70 days.
You started to know these fish by their first names.
No, not really. There's a lot of fish here, and it changes. I mean, you can't count on anything to be the same. I mean, there's general ideas of what you got to do, but it changes from day to day, from week to week, certainly from year to year.
Whatever the change, it's still beautiful water, and with the late afternoon sun at our backs, we're two silhouettes on a culvert shade. But pretty doesn't mean forgetting the basics. Remember, the equation is drainage equals current equals bait fish. Equals bass.
There's one.
All right.
All right. Good fish.
About 4 pounds? 4 pounds? Whoa!
All right.
Woo! Nice fish. That's the way they make them in the Hudson.
Yep.
Largemouth bass on the Hudson. They come big and they come pretty. And they can be yours when you cash in on the culverts. Wherever we go on the water, we build on the water. and too often leave our rotting legacy behind, like these tumble-down wooden barges which are found strewn all up and down the Hudson River and its creeks. No, this is not a Civil War bass boat, though it is reminiscent of the Merrimack and the Monitor. It's a shoreline scene in the Rondout Creek, one of 4 major feeder creeks on the river, which shows you just how much old wooden structure is found on the Hudson. And this is just the visible stuff. Now, depending on the season and the tide, it all holds bass. So where do you start? First, let's look at the map. And let me explain that creeks on the Hudson are not streams that you can just jump across. They're up to 7 miles long, and at spots, a quarter mile wide, with depths up to 60 feet. They're major chunks of H2O. And the points of these creeks, like this one, can hold huge schools of largemouth, especially in late summer and early fall, which is exactly why we're fishing this particular creek mouth jetty, despite all the rough water caused by the wind and the tide. But let's say you pick a more peaceful day to launch your boat in one of the major feeder creeks, the Esopus Creek in this case. What do you see? An endless march of wooden pilings. So, should you fish these pilings? The answer is found in the seasonal migration of the largemouth bass. With apologies to the author, we'll call it a clockwork